A pretty face won't help you here, Miss Loxley. The Duke of Sparsholt said it before Edith had finished removing her gloves. Late September light poured through the glass roof of the temporary, photographic pavilion at Glenstead Park, touching brass fittings, black cloth, polished mahogany, and the long work table, where a single old photograph waited beneath a square of clean paper. Beyond the open doors, the former orangery smelled faintly of damp stone and citrus leaves. Inside, the atmosphere was more formal than any studio Edith would have chosen for herself. Douglas Thackwell stood beside the table in a dark morning coat, tall, controlled, and unmistakably accustomed to rooms changing shape around his title. At 41, he had the composed severity of a man who had learned to make stillness look like authority. Piers Kirkby, the fashionable London photographer already engaged for the Glenstead house party, wore his confidence more brightly. He had greeted Edith at the entrance by asking whether she had come to assist with the ladies' poses. When she told him she owned Loxley photographic rooms in Winchester, he had called that charming. Edith set her gloves beside her travelling case. "That's fortunate, Your Grace. I hadn't planned to use it." Douglas's eyes sharpened. Piers gave a soft laugh that died quickly when no one joined him. "Your letters were signed Loxley," Douglas said. "I expected Mr. Loxley. You did not think ask no, a beat passed. My mistake." Edith accepted the correction without rewarding it. "May I see the photograph?" Douglas turned the old print toward her. The woman in it stood beside a gentleman near what appeared to be a garden wall or painted exterior backdrop. They were close enough to suggest privacy, though not touching. Nothing indecent appeared in the image. It did not need to. Society often required only proximity and imagination. Edith opened her equipment case. The worn pearwood lens cap inherited from her father lay near the top beside wrapped glass, a loupe, and 2 magnifiers. Her fingers brushed the smooth edge once before she took the smaller lens and left the cap where it was. "How old is this print?" 8 years, Douglas said. "Approximately. Original mounting, as far as I know. Who has handled it recently?" "My solicitor and I, Mr. Kirkby, yesterday." Edith glanced at Piers. "Did you remove it from the mount?" "Of course not." His tone suggested the question insulted him. "Good." She bent over the photograph. Under magnification, the first irregularity appeared along the woman's sleeve. The edge was too clean, not sharp in the ordinary way a well-focused portrait might be sharp, but unnaturally separated from the tonal softness behind it. Edith shifted the lens toward the gentleman's shoulder. There, too, a faint change in surface texture seemed to interrupt the depth of the scene. She adjusted the angle toward the light. Douglas had not moved. Piers had. He now stood nearer. "Well?" he asked. "There are irregularities." "Meaning?" Douglas said. Edith did not look up. "Meaning I have questions." Piers sighed. "Everything becomes mysterious when one wishes to make a profession of suspicion." Edith moved the magnifier lower, and everything becomes simple when one is paid not to look twice. Douglas's mouth changed almost imperceptibly. Piers did not. Edith pointed to the woman's outline. "This boundary behaves more like the edge of paper than the edge of a body against a background." Douglas leaned closer but stopped before his sleeve crossed into her working space. "You think the photograph was altered?" "I think it may have been assembled." Piers laughed outright. "With what? Scissors?" Edith finally looked at him. "Possibly." The amusement faded. She returned to the print. 2 separate paper photographs can be cut, arranged together, and photographed again. The new negative records the arrangement faithfully. The resulting print may look like a single sitting, even when the people never stood together. Douglas stared at the image. Would the seams not show? Not necessarily. Careful trimming, dark card, compatible backgrounds, retouching, and another generation of printing can soften them. What matters is whether the surfaces behave as one exposure should. And these do not? Not entirely. She shifted the magnifier again. There is also a faint paper-like texture here. I will not call it proof, not yet. Piers folded his arms. This is a great deal of female fussiness over an old photograph. Silence fell so completely that the ticking mechanism of the nearby exposure clock seemed suddenly loud. Douglas turned his head. Mr. Kirkby, Your Grace, you will not speak to Miss Loxley that way again. Piers's face remained pleasant, but effort entered it. I meant no offense. Then you will find it easy not to repeat. Edith lowered the magnifier. The intervention mattered, though she would not mistake it for trust. Douglas had corrected another man. He had not yet corrected himself. Who is she? Edith asked. His attention returned to the photograph. For the first time since she entered, something in his posture loosened without becoming softer. My sister. Edith looked again at the woman's face. She had expected a disputed commission, perhaps a question of inheritance, perhaps a family quarrel about an old likeness. Not this. Where is she now? Dead? The word carried no ornament. 3 years. Edith waited. Douglas continued. The photograph appeared 8 years ago while she was engaged. It suggested she had met that gentleman privately. She denied it. Did she continue denying it? Until she died. Edith lifted her eyes. Did anyone believe her? A pause. Not entirely. The answer seemed to cost him more than the confession required. Piers looked toward the windows, suddenly interested in the lawn. Edith studied Douglas rather than the print. He had not said his sister lied. He had said no one believed her completely. There was a difference, and shame lived inside it. A photograph can reproduce detail accurately and still mislead the person looking at it, Edith said. It should begin a question, not end one. Douglas's gaze dropped to the old image. You believe she was telling the truth? I believe the photograph has not earned the right to call her a liar. Piers exhaled impatiently. Your Grace, there is no reason to let one provincial photographer turn a family sorrow into a scientific crusade. Douglas did not look at him. Miss Loxley, what would you require to continue? Independent access to the relevant plates, prints, studio records, and anyone who handled the old commission if such records survive. I report to you, not to Mr. Kirkby. Piers took a step forward. That is absurd, Douglas answered before Edith could. It is agreed. Piers's expression hardened. You engaged me to photograph this house party, and you will continue to do so. Miss Loxley has a different commission, based on speculation. Edith closed the magnifier and returned it to her case. Then you should have nothing to fear from examination. Douglas looked at her, and for the first time, his attention rested on her face without reducing her to it. You have my authority to inspect what you need. Authority is useful, Edith said. Records are better. A flicker of dry amusement touched his eyes. Then you shall have both. Edith lifted her gloves but did not put them on. She looked once more at the woman in the photograph, frozen beside a man she might never have met in that place. 8 years of judgment could hide inside a few inches of paper. The unsettling part was no longer that someone might once have known how to manufacture such a lie. The unsettling part was that Piers Kirkby had stopped laughing the moment Edith explained exactly how it could be done. By 9 the next morning, The light over Glenstead Park had settled into the pale, even brightness Edith preferred for a formal sitting. The photographic pavilion smelled faintly of collodion, damp wood, and the sharp mineral trace left by the developing trays. Douglas stood before the painted studio backdrop in a dark coat, one hand resting lightly against the back of a chair he had been instructed not to move. Piers Kirkby adjusted the camera with the solemnity of a priest attending a sacrament. Edith Thu stood near the work table with her notes open. The old disputed photograph of Douglas's sister had been returned to protected keeping overnight and had not been touched since Edith examined it. Today's work was supposed to be simpler, a current portrait, a clean plate, no ghosts from 8 years before. Douglas had been still for nearly half a minute when Piers said, "Your Grace, if you would raise your chin slightly." Douglas obeyed, then shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. Edith saw the motion. "If you keep testing whether photographers can detect impatience, Your Grace, you are going to be disappointed." Douglas's mouth moved. "Is that a professional warning? A practical one?" "Mr. Kirkby only tells people to hold still when he would prefer them not to blur." Piers glanced over his shoulder. "Miss Loxley, I assure you I am capable of directing my own sitting." "Then direct it." Douglas looked toward Edith for a fraction too long. "I suspect I am the difficulty." "At present, yes." Something almost amused entered his eyes, but he returned his gaze to the appointed point. The exposure was made without further movement. Piers carried the plate into the adjoining work area, and Edith followed at a respectful distance, more interested in the negative than in whether Douglas considered himself successfully immortalized. The image emerged gradually under development. First, the pale architecture of his face, then the dark coat, then the sleeve. Edith leaned closer. "Stop." Piers's hand paused above the tray. "What? Do not discard it." "I had not said I would. You were reaching for the rinse as though you intended to move it out of sequence." Piers's expression cooled. Edith pointed. Across Douglas's left sleeve, a narrow, crescent-shaped scratch curved through the image. It was slight, perhaps caused during coating or handling before exposure. The defect would likely be objectionable in a finished portrait. As an identifier, it was useful. Piers gave a dismissive sound. "A spoiled plate, a marked plate. Your distinction is sentimental." "No, it is practical. If a flaw is unique, it can help identify what came from this negative later." Douglas had entered quietly enough that neither Piers nor Edith noticed until he spoke. "You believe this plate may matter beyond the portrait." Edith did not exaggerate. "I believe the first current plate made after yesterday's examination should be preserved exactly as it is. If nothing happens, the scratch remains meaningless. If something does, we will know where this image began." Piers folded his arms. "You are making an archive out of ordinary studio waste. Then, preserving it costs you nothing except the inconvenience of not throwing it away." Douglas stepped closer to the tray, careful not to touch the work surface. "How many prints would normally be made?" Piers answered before Edith could. "2 working proofs." At the washing table, the junior assistant's head lifted. The motion was quick. So was the way he looked down again. Douglas noticed. 2, he repeated. Piers's tone remained smooth. "Usually." Edith looked toward the assistant. His hands had stopped for one beat over the rinsing tray. "Have any been made yet?" she asked. "No, miss," the young man said. Piers turned sharply. "No one asked you." Edith kept her eyes on the assistant. He answered correctly. Douglas's gaze moved from the young man to Piers. "Then none are to be made until the plate has been recorded." Pierre's jaw tightened. Your Grace, this is becoming absurd. Perhaps humor me. I was engaged to produce portraits, not submit every scratched plate to legal ceremony. No ceremony. Douglas looked toward the pavilion doors. Mr. Harland, the estate solicitor, appeared less than 10 minutes later, carrying a leather memorandum book and the expression of a man who had spent much of his life being summoned into rooms where other people had already become annoyed. He was grey-haired, spare, and methodical. Edith explained the plate first. Harland did not interrupt. He examined D6 visually without touching the emulsion surface, then asked for the date, sitter, identifying mark, and current condition. Has anyone printed from it? He asked. No, Edith said. Mr. Kirkby stated that 2 working proofs would ordinarily be made later. I said 2 would be made, Piers corrected. Not ordinarily. Harland glanced at him. Then I shall write 2 intended working proofs, not yet made. Piers said nothing. Harland entered the notation. The plate was identified as D6. The crescent scratch on Douglas's left sleeve was described. Edith signed the observation. Piers signed after reading the line twice. Douglas added his name beneath theirs. Harland then produced a padded wooden plate box from the supplies he had brought at Douglas's instruction. D6 was placed inside, wrapped so that nothing pressed against the image surface, and closed. Where will it remain? Edith asked. In the locked cabinet, in my temporary office beside the library. Harland tucked the box securely beneath one arm. If Mr. Kirkby requires it for the agreed printing, he may request release through me. I will record when it leaves and when it returns. Reasonable, Douglas said. Piers gave him a look that suggested the opposite. You are allowing Miss Loxley to turn scratches into evidence before there is a crime. Edith answered, I am allowing a plate to remain itself. Piers laughed once, without humor. Harland left with D6. Edith watched until the box disappeared through the orangery doors. Only then did she return to her notes. When she looked up, Douglas was watching the junior assistant rather than her. The young man had resumed rinsing another plate. His hands were steady again. His face was not. You saw him hesitate, Douglas said quietly. Yes. What does it mean? Nothing yet. You are very fond of that answer. It has saved me from being wrong in public more than once. Douglas considered her. A useful habit. You might try it. This time, the amusement reached his eyes. Piers, who had begun cleaning the camera fittings, pretended not to hear. Later that morning, after Douglas's sitting had ended, and Piers moved to prepare another room for the house party portraits, Edith returned to the old photograph of the late Miss Thackwell. The print had been brought out only for the examinations and remained under Douglas's supervision. Edith placed it beneath the stronger window light and reached for the small magnifier she had used the previous day. Douglas came to the table carrying another instrument. Harland found this in an old optical case. He held out a stronger focusing magnifier. It may be of use. Edith extended her hand. Their fingertips touched around the metal rim. Neither had expected the contact. It lasted only an instant, but not so briefly that she failed to feel the warmth of his hand. Douglas went still. So did she. Then he released the magnifier first and stepped back half a pace. Thank you, Edith said. Of course. His voice had changed slightly, though she could not have said how. Edith bent over the photograph before the moment could become larger than it deserved. Through the stronger lens, the irregularity near the woman's sleeve sharpened. What had looked yesterday like a faint change in tone now showed a fibrous texture. Not fabric. Paper. She moved the magnifier toward the gentleman's shoulder and found a similar interruption there. "There," she said. Douglas leaned nearer without entering her space. "You see more?" "Yes, enough. Enough to strengthen the question." She indicated the edge. "This resembles the surface of one paper print being copied into another image. If figures were cut from separate photographs and re-photographed, this is the sort of trace I would expect. Then someone did it." Edith looked up. "Someone may have done it." Douglas exhaled slowly. "You refuse certainty even when it is becoming inconvenient. Especially then." He studied the photograph. "What do you need next?" "Access, records, originals if they survive, and patience. I can provide 2 of those." "Which 2? "Access and records." Edith almost smiled. "That is honest." Douglas's gaze dropped to the woman in the photograph. The humor left him. "My sister would have liked you." Edith did not answer the sentiment. Not yet. Instead, she lowered the magnifier and looked through the open pavilion toward the orangery corridor where Harland had carried D6. The plate was safe. No prints had been made. The scratch was recorded. Nothing had happened to it beyond what everyone present could account for. Yet the junior assistant had watched that locked box leave as though something important had gone with it. Edith had learned not to mistake fear for proof. She had also learned not to ignore it. By the 3rd morning, D6 remained exactly where Mr. Harland had placed it, boxed, recorded, and locked in the cabinet beside the library, with no paper proof yet made from the plate. Edith confirmed that fact before she entered the photographic pavilion. She had learned that a mystery rarely became clearer by allowing small assumptions to multiply unnoticed. The day's work concerned a group portrait of 12 members of the Glenstead house party, and the pavilion had been rearranged with chairs, a narrow table, and a painted architectural backdrop to create the illusion that 12 people naturally spent their mornings holding identical expressions beneath a glass roof. Lady Marjorie Norcross arrived among the first. At 34, she possessed the polished composure of a woman who had never needed to raise her voice to make another person feel out of place. Her pale grey silk caught the light whenever she turned. Douglas entered shortly after her and took the central position Piers had chosen for him. Edith stood behind the camera while Piers considered the arrangement. "Lady Marjorie, half an inch to your left." Marjorie obeyed, then glanced toward Edith. I had not realized ladies were now required behind the apparatus as well as before it. Edith adjusted the focusing cloth. "We are not required, my lady. Some of us are employed there." Marjorie smiled. How industrious. Piers pretended to be occupied with the tripod. "Photography is forgiving work for a pretty woman," Marjorie continued. "One sits prettily while clever machinery does the rest." Edith looked up. "I generally find the machinery sits perfectly still. The people require instructions." One of the older gentlemen coughed into his hand. Douglas's eyes moved toward Edith, and she saw amusement there before he concealed it. Marjorie's smile remained perfect. "Then perhaps Mr. Kirkby is fortunate to have such assistants." "Miss Loxley is not Mr. Kirkby's assistant," Douglas said. The room quieted. His tone was not loud. It did not need to be. "She has been retained independently to examine irregularities in separate photographic work." Marjorie looked toward him. "I see. Do you?" Douglas asked. A faint color touched her cheeks. "Then I stand corrected." Edith returned her attention to the camera. "You do." She said it gently enough that no one could accuse her of discourtesy, and clearly enough that no one could mistake the answer. Piers stepped behind the lens before Marjorie could reply. If we are all finished discussing professional arrangements, perhaps we might obtain the portrait before the light changes. The first exposure failed because Douglas shifted his shoulder near the end of it. Edith noticed before Piers announced the flaw. Again, Piers said irritably. Douglas looked toward Edith. Was that me? Yes, Your Grace. I thought I had been perfectly still. You thought incorrectly. The corner of his mouth moved. During the second attempt, he remained steady until the final seconds, when his gaze drifted toward Edith and his head turned almost imperceptibly. She lowered her hand from the timing watch. Even dukes blur if they refuse to hold still. Douglas stared at her for one startled beat. Then he laughed. It was not the controlled sound of a gentleman acknowledging wit at dinner. It was genuine, brief, and warm enough to change his whole face. Edith had not expected it. Her own smile came before she could prevent it. Their eyes met across the camera. For one moment, the pavilion, the waiting guests, and Piers's impatience seemed to fall back around the edges of that look. Then Edith broke it. You may laugh after the exposure, Your Grace. A cruel profession, a demanding one. Then I surrender. The third exposure succeeded. Marjorie said nothing while Piers checked the work, but Edith noticed the way her gaze moved from Douglas to Edith and remained there a second too long. After luncheon, Piers announced that he wanted one final commemorative plate before several guests changed their afternoon plans. This group was smaller and less formal. It included himself, the junior assistant, 2 servants who had helped move equipment, and Edith. There is no reason for me to be in it, Edith said. There is every reason, Piers replied. Posterity should know who made the Duke hold still. Douglas, standing near the orangery doors, gave a quiet sound that might have been another laugh. Edith ignored both men. The composition was harmless enough, and refusing would only make the request seem important. She took the far left position beside the junior assistant. Her arms rested naturally, one hand slightly forward. The skirt of her dark blue dress fell in narrow folds beneath her hip, one crease turning inward into a small triangular shape. Piers studied the grouping, made 2 minor adjustments, and exposed the plate. This time no one moved. When the negative had been developed, Edith checked the studio notation herself. G3, the assistant said as he entered it. Correct. She examined the plate only long enough to confirm the notation and the general arrangement. Her own figure stood at the extreme left, partly separated from the central cluster by a small gap. Piers took the plate from the drying position with practiced care, satisfied with the numbering. Your confidence overwhelms me. You have enough for both of us. Edith gathered her notes. She had promised Mr. Harland that she would review the condition record for D6 before dinner, and she left through the orangery toward the house. The junior assistant watched her disappear. Only when her footsteps had faded did Piers set G3 on the work table. When it is ready, he said, make the ordinary group print. The young man nodded. Yes, sir. And one additional proof. The assistant looked up. Another full one. No from the left edge. I want Miss Loxley clear. The assistant hesitated. Pronounced? Obviously. Piers lowered his voice. It does not go on the mounting list. The young man glanced toward the open orangery door. She checks the numbers. She checks what she knows exists. Piers moved closer to the table. And when Mr. Harland next releases D6 for the agreed printing, I want one additional unmounted proof from that plate as well. There are meant to be 2. There will be 2 on the list. The assistant's face tightened. And the third, you give it to me. Mr. Harland recorded the plate. The plate, yes. Piers's voice remained almost pleasant. Not every sheet of paper touched by light. The assistant swallowed. If Miss Loxley counts the printing paper, then you should become better at counting what she is meant to see. A sound came from the orangery. Both men turned. Edith stepped back into the pavilion. The assistant's face lost color. Piers did not move. Edith crossed to the small side table and picked up the pencil case she had forgotten. I thought I left this here. You did, Piers said. His tone was effortless. Edith looked at the assistant. His hands were trembling slightly. Are you unwell? No, miss. You are certain? Yes. Piers rested one hand against the table. He has been given a tedious instruction. Some young men find accuracy exhausting. Edith met the assistant's eyes. He looked away first. Then I hope the instruction was worth the distress. Piers smiled. Merely printing. Edith slipped the pencil case into her bag. As she turned to leave, Piers spoke again. Did you enjoy being on the other side of the lens? Edith paused. Not particularly. Most women do. She looked at him. I prefer the side where I can see what people are doing. For the first time that day, Piers Kirkby did not smile. Sewer, the fourth morning began, with no camera prepared for use. Edith had asked for uninterrupted daylight instead, and by 9:30, the old photograph of Douglas's sister rested beneath a clean sheet of glass on the long table near the pavilion windows. D6 remained locked in Mr. Harland's cabinet beside the library. No proof had yet been printed from it. G3 remained among Piers Kirkby's current studio plates, entered under the previous day's notation. Piers himself had taken 2 of the house guests to another room for individual sittings, leaving the pavilion quieter than Edith had known it since her arrival. The doors to the old orangery stood open. A footman passed occasionally beyond them, and somewhere farther inside the house a clock marked the quarter hour. Douglas entered without escort and stopped on the opposite side of the table. Mr. Harland said you wanted the photograph again. I wanted better light. Edith adjusted the magnifier over the woman's sleeve. Yesterday, I could see enough to suspect a paper surface. Today, I want to know whether I was persuading myself. And I have not decided yet. Douglas glanced down at the image. You are remarkably patient with uncertainty. I am remarkably suspicious of convenient certainty. That sounds deserved. Edith looked up. His expression had changed since the first morning, not softened. Douglas did not seem a man who softened easily. But the instinct to defend himself had weakened. Before I go farther, she said, I need to understand what happened to your sister after this photograph appeared. His gaze remained on the table. You know the engagement ended. I know it was damaged by the image. I do not know what you believed, what she said, or who had access to the portraits that may have been used. Douglas took the chair nearest the window, but did not sit immediately. Her engagement was to the younger son of an earl. His family valued discretion almost as highly as lineage, possibly more. Did they receive the photograph directly? His mother did, in a plain envelope. From whom? No name. Douglas finally sat. There was a note saying my sister had been meeting another gentleman privately. The photograph was offered as proof. Edith lowered the magnifier, and she denied it immediately. What exactly did she deny? Douglas looked at her. Everything that mattered. She said she had never stood with that man in the place shown. She said there had been no private meeting. She knew him socially, nothing more. Did the gentleman confirm that? He denied a secret meeting as well, but by then his own reputation complicated matters. He had debts, a fondness for cards. My sister's fiancé's family decided denial cost them less than scandal did. And you? The question altered the room. Douglas's hand tightened once on the back of the chair. Edith waited. She had no intention of making the answer easier for him. I believed her about the affair, he said at last. I did not believe her about the photograph. Meaning? I thought there had been some meeting she was ashamed to admit. Perhaps innocent, perhaps foolish. I thought the camera could not have invented both people. Edith said nothing, Douglas continued. She kept telling me there had been no meeting at all. I kept asking for the part she was leaving out. Was there one? No. The answer came faster now than it had 2 days earlier. Not if what you are finding is true. Even if I prove manipulation, that does not tell us every fact of her life. No, his voice dropped, but it tells me which fact I had no right to invent. Edith watched him carefully. What happened between you after the engagement ended? We quarreled. He looked toward the old photograph, but not directly at his sister's face. Not loudly. That would have been easier. She became very controlled with me. Courteous. She stopped trying to persuade me. A bitter shadow crossed his expression. For nearly a year she remained mostly at Glenstead. Society behaved as society often does. No one openly accused her once the engagement was over. They simply stopped trusting rooms where she stood. Edith knew that kind of punishment. It wore gloves and spoke softly. Partly. Douglas drew a slow breath. Years later, I told her I regretted pressing her when she was already being judged by everyone else. She told me regret was useful only if it taught a man what to do differently next time. Edith's fingers stilled beside the magnifier. She sounds sensible. She was. Did she forgive you? His eyes met hers. She said she no longer wished to punish me. I am not certain that is the same thing. Edith respected him for not demanding that it be. And her death. 3 years ago. An illness unrelated to any of this. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that makes the story cleaner. His mouth tightened. She knew I loved her. I knew she loved me. Neither of those facts erased what I had failed to give her when she needed it. Belief, yes. The word remained between them. Douglas looked down at his own hands. On your first morning here, I looked at you and decided your appearance was relevant to your competence. Edith said nothing. I called attention to your face before I had seen your work. I expected a man because I saw a surname and filled in the rest for myself. Then when you stood before me, I made another assumption, because it was easier than admitting I knew nothing about you. He lifted his eyes. I am sorry. Edith had heard polished apologies before. They were often requests for immediate absolution, dressed as manners. This one did not ask her to make him comfortable. Thank you. Douglas waited. That is all? For now. A faint line appeared between his brows. You do not forgive easily. I did not say I had not forgiven you. Then what are you saying? Edith placed the magnifier down. That trust is not proved by understanding the last difficult choice. It is proved by what you do with the next one. Douglas was silent. He did not promise grandeur. He did not tell her he had changed. After a moment, he nodded once. Fair. That answer mattered more than a speech would have. Edith returned to the photograph. Neither of them moved closer. There was no need. The silence between them had altered enough. She adjusted the glass so the morning light struck the lower edge of the woman's sleeve. Look here. Douglas rose and came around the table, stopping beside her without brushing her arm. Edith held the magnifier over the edge. Do you see the faint fibers? He bent slightly. Yes, they do not belong to the fabric. She moved the lens toward the gentleman's shoulder. And here, similar texture, paper, most likely. Edith changed the angle. If separate portraits were cut out, arranged against another image or dark card, and photographed again, the new negative would faithfully preserve the cut figures while disguising the fact that they began as paper, which means whoever made this needed access to portraits of both people. Exactly, Douglas straightened. My family had portraits made that year. By whom? He frowned. I cannot remember the establishment. Then, that is our next question. Before he could answer, footsteps approached through the orangery. Mr. Harland entered, carrying an old household account book tied with faded tape. Your Grace, Miss Loxley, I believe I have found the commission. Douglas turned. Which one? The photographic orders placed by House Thackwell 8 years ago. Harland opened the book to a marked page. Several family portraits were sent through a Winchester studio. The proprietor later died, and the business changed hands. Edith stepped nearer. Do the accounts identify anyone who worked there? Not directly. Harland touched a later entry farther down the page, but one printer from that establishment appears in subsequent supplier correspondence. Retired now. Douglas's attention sharpened. Alive? As far as I can determine. Where? Winchester. Edith looked from the account book to the old photograph. The evidence had shifted. Until now, they had been studying what the image looked like. At last, they had a path toward who might have handled the portraits before the lie existed. We should speak to him, she said. Douglas nodded. Tomorrow. Edith closed the magnifier. Tomorrow. She looked once more at the fibrous boundary along the dead woman's sleeve. 8 years earlier, someone had needed more than scissors and a camera. They had needed access. If the retired printer remembered who possessed that access, the old photograph might finally stop being merely suspicious and begin pointing toward a hand. The carriage left Glenstead Park shortly after 8 the next morning, carrying Edith, Douglas, and Mr. Harland toward Winchester beneath a sky still pale with early autumn mist. The distance was not great. Roughly 12 miles by the road Mr. Harland had chosen, but recent rain had softened several stretches enough to slow the horses. Edith sat opposite the solicitor with Douglas beside the window. No disputed photograph traveled with them. 01 remained under protected Thackwell, keeping at Glenstead. D6 remained locked in Mr. Harland's cabinet beside the library, still without any paper proof made from it. G3 remained among Piers Kirkby's current studio plates. Edith preferred it that way. A witness should be asked what he remembered, before being shown what anyone wanted him to remember. Mr. Harland opened the old account book across his knees. The former studio stood near the western side of Winchester. The proprietor died some years ago. This printer appears in later trade correspondence, so I have reason to believe he remained in the city after the business changed hands. Douglas looked from the window. Did you tell him why we were coming? Only that House Thackwell wished to ask about an old photographic commission. Good, Edith said. If he knows Mr. Kirkby is involved before we ask, he may begin arranging his memories around the name. Douglas's gaze rested on her. You distrust useful answers. I distrust answers that become useful too quickly. A demanding distinction. It keeps disappointment orderly. A corner of his mouth shifted, but he did not answer. Winchester was fully awake when they arrived. Delivery carts crowded the narrower streets. Shopkeepers stood beneath awnings, and the cathedral bells marked the late morning while their carriage turned into a quieter lane behind a stationer's shop. The retired printer occupied rooms above it. He was a thin man with silver hair, stooped shoulders, and fingertips stained deeply enough that retirement had not erased the evidence of his trade. He looked at Douglas first, as most men did, then at Mr. Harland. His attention stopped on Edith. "Loxley?" "Yes. Your father bought paper from me." Edith had not expected that. "You remember him?" "Twice. Paid promptly. Wrapped his own plates better than half the London men who thought themselves artists." Something warm and painful moved through her before she could prevent it. "That sounds like him." The old man nodded toward the chairs. "If you have come about printing, I have given it up. We have come about the studio where you worked 8 years ago," Mr. Harland said. The printer's face changed. "That is a less pleasant subject." Douglas remained standing until Edith and Harland had taken their seats. Then he chose a chair near the wall rather than the central position. Edith noticed the Duke could distort testimony simply by appearing to want one answer more than another. Douglas appeared to understand that now. Harland opened the account book to the old Thackwell commission. "Do you remember work associated with this family?" The printer studied the page, the crest on the wrappers. "Yes." "Why specifically?" Edith asked. The orders stopped suddenly. "Did you know why?" "No." The printer rubbed one thumb against his stained forefinger. "Great houses rarely explain themselves to men who wash their negatives." Douglas did not correct the slight bitterness. Edith asked, "Who handled the portraits?" "Several people. The proprietor, 2 operators, printers, assistants." "Was Piers Kirkby among them?" The man looked at her more carefully. "Yes." No one spoke for a moment. Edith deliberately kept her next question narrow. "What work did you personally see Mr. Kirkby perform?" "Portrait work, copy work. Whatever he believed would get his name passed upward." "What do you mean by copy work?" "Photographing photographs, documents sometimes. Older portraits, flat things." "Did he ever work from arranged paper photographs?" The printer gave her a long look. "You know the method. I know it exists. I am asking what you saw." That earned a faint nod. "Yes, figures cut from separate prints, set together against card or another background, then copied onto a fresh plate." Douglas's expression tightened. "For fraudulent purposes?" Edith looked at him before the printer could answer. "That is a different question." Douglas inclined his head. "Quite right." The printer leaned back. Sometimes the work was innocent. A memorial group with someone already dead. A family arrangement when one person could not sit with the others. The camera did not care why the paper figures were together. "Did Mr. Kirkby use black mounting card?" Edith asked. "Often." "Did he order extra unmounted proofs?" "Yes, beyond the client's stated number." "Sometimes." Mr. Harland's pencil moved across the page. "Did you ever see him do this in connection with House Thackwell?" The printer grew still. "I remember him handling work from the commission. I remember him ordering extra proofs around that period. I remember black card and copy negatives being ordinary enough in his hands." He looked directly at Douglas. "But if you ask whether I saw him cut your sister from a portrait and make a false photograph, I did not." Douglas absorbed the answer without pressing. Edith said, "Then we will not claim that you did." The printer's shoulders eased slightly. "Good. Do you remember anything else specific about the commission?" Harland asked. "Only that when it ended, Kirkby was angry." "Why? Lost work, I suppose. He was ambitious." The man paused. He said titled families became sentimental when a young woman's reputation entered the matter. Douglas's eyes hardened. "Those exact words?" The printer shook his head. "No, not exact. 8 years is too long for exact words." Harland immediately stopped writing, crossed out the beginning of a quotation, and replaced it with a note describing the recollection as approximate. Edith appreciated the care. "Did Mr. Kirkby have access to finished family portraits as well as negatives?" she asked. If he was working in the room, yes, staff moved through the same materials constantly. Enough access to obtain source portraits without requesting a new sitting. Possibly. Possibly, Edith repeated. Not certainly. The printer gave her another approving glance. "You ask like someone who has watched certainty ruin a good case." Edith thought of Douglas's sister. "I have watched certainty ruin more than that." Douglas heard her, but he did not look at her in a way that made the moment public. Instead, he addressed the printer. "Your name will not be repeated among the guests at Glenstead." The old man frowned. "I have not asked for protection." "No." Douglas's tone remained even. "I am offering privacy. There are people in my house who would treat an old scandal as entertainment." Before they understood what you had actually said. The printer studied him. "Then I accept the privacy." Harland closed the account book. "If you remember anything further, send word through the stationer below. It will come directly to me." The interview ended without revelation, dramatic enough to satisfy a gossiping room. Edith preferred it. They had gained method, access, and history. They had not gained proof of 01. That distinction kept the investigation honest. Mr. Harland went downstairs first to speak with the stationer about forwarding any message. Edith followed Douglas toward the narrow staircase. The upper turn was steep enough that she gathered her skirts in one hand and placed the other lightly against the wall. Douglas descended one step, then stopped beside the landing. "May I give you my arm?" The question was quiet. No assumption, no display. Edith looked at him. "Yes." She placed her gloved hand against his sleeve. His arm remained steady beneath her fingers. He did not draw her closer or attempt to guide her pace. They descended the narrow flight together, and the moment the floor leveled beneath them, Douglas released her. The contact had been practical. Edith, nevertheless, felt its absence with an awareness she did not care to examine too closely. Outside, Mr. Harland had already reached the carriage and appeared absorbed in securing his papers. The return journey began under a clearing sky. For the first several miles, Douglas said almost nothing. Then, as the city gave way to open road, he spoke without looking at Edith. 8 years ago, I thought admitting uncertainty would make me weak." Edith waited. "My sister said the meeting had never happened. The photograph said something else. I told myself I was being rational by standing between the two." "Were you?" "No." His hand rested loosely against his knee. "I was frightened of saying I did not know, so I believed what I could see because uncertainty felt like weakness." Edith turned slightly toward him. "Then leave uncertainty standing next time." Douglas looked at her. "Even when it is unbearable, especially then." The carriage moved through a shallow rut and settled again. "You ask a great deal of people," he said, "only when they insist on deciding other people's lives." His expression almost softened. "I am beginning to understand why you are difficult to impress. You opened our acquaintance by insulting me. You gave yourself considerable ground to recover." Douglas laughed under his breath. Across from them, Mr. Harland turned toward the window with the disciplined courtesy of a man pretending not to hear. Edith allowed herself one small smile, then returned to the matter that had followed her from the printer's rooms. Extra unmounted proofs. Black card, copy negatives, access. None of it established who had made 01. Yet it offered a pattern worth testing in the present. "When we reach Glenstead," she said, "I want Mr. Kirkby's current worksheet, the paper use entries, and the mounted print count placed side by side." Douglas's attention sharpened. "You think something will be missing?" "I think, if an old method is being used again, paper will leave a quieter trail than glass." She looked toward the road ahead. Somewhere at Glenstead, G3 remained in Pierre's studio control. Somewhere else in the house, D6 waited behind Harland's lock for its first authorized printing. If Pierre's still believed extra paper was easier to hide than a plate, Edith intended to find out exactly how much paper he thought no one would count. Sewer. By 9 the following morning, Mr. Harland carried D6 back into the photographic pavilion in the same padded wooden box in which he had removed it 4 days earlier. Edith was already waiting beside the long work table with Piers Kirkby's current worksheet, the paper use entries, and the mounting list arranged in 3 neat columns. Douglas stood near the open orangery doors, far enough from the equipment not to interfere. The junior assistant remained at the printing table. Harland opened his memorandum before he opened the box. D6 released at 9 minutes past 9 for the 2 agreed working proofs, he said, condition to be checked before and after printing. Piers gave a weary sigh. Must we narrate every movement of a plate? Only the movements we may later wish we had remembered, Edith said. Harland lifted D6 by the edges and held it toward the window. The thin crescent scratch remained visible across Douglas's left sleeve. No new damage appeared. Edith confirmed the condition. Piers did the same. Then Harland placed the plate in the printing position and stepped to the far side of the pavilion, where he remained within sight while reviewing accounts with Douglas. He did not hover over every sheet of sensitized paper. That would have made ordinary work impossible. The assistant prepared the first authorized proof, then the second. Piers stood beside him, ostensibly checking exposure. Edith was occupied at the other end of the work table, comparing the previous day's entries. Only the assistant saw Piers tap one finger against the stack of paper. The young man hesitated. Piers's expression did not change. A third sheet was placed beneath D6. Another exposure was made. That paper did not join the 2 authorized proofs. The assistant slid it beneath a drying board at Piers's side. Piers took it a few minutes later and folded clean paper over it before placing it in his private portfolio. No one moved the glass negative outside the agreed procedure. When the 2 declared proofs were finished, Harland returned. D6 was lifted again, examined under daylight, and compared with the earlier condition record. The crescent scratch remained unchanged. No additional mark appeared. Harland entered the return time, replaced the plate in its padded box, and carried it back toward the house. "It returns to my cabinet now," he said. "There will be no further release without another entry." "You have transformed portraiture into bookkeeping," Piers muttered. Edith looked at the 2 visible proofs. Bookkeeping is often where people discover what artistry hoped they would overlook. Harland left with D6. By late morning, Edith began the count. The mounting list showed 2 D6 working proofs. The worksheet showed 3 paper exposures against that plate. She checked the paper use entry. 3 sheets had indeed been taken for D6. Mr. Kirkby. Piers did not look up from trimming the edge of another guest's portrait. Yes, there were 3 sheets exposed from D6 this morning. Were there? The worksheet says so. Then, perhaps one spoiled. Where is it? Discarded, presumably. Edith moved to the G3 entry. Her attention sharpened. The group plate had produced its ordinary print. but the paper use sheet showed another exposure from the left portion of the negative. And this? Piers finally looked at her. Another test. From the left edge, where I stood. You did stand there. I cannot change geography for you. Douglas crossed the pavilion. What is missing? Edith kept her gaze on the figures. One unmounted proof from D6. One additional print from the left edge of G3. Both spoiled? Douglas asked. Piers shrugged. Most likely. Then produce them. Spoiled paper is rubbish, Your Grace. Rubbish can still exist. Piers's mouth tightened. The assistant may have thrown it away. Edith looked toward the young man. His face went pale. Did you? He opened his mouth. Piers answered first. Must every servant in this pavilion be interrogated now? Douglas turned sharply. Do not answer for him. The assistant swallowed. I do not know where the sheets are now, Your Grace. The wording caught Edith's attention. Not that they had been discarded, not that they had never existed, only that he did not know where they were now. Douglas looked at Piers. Your commission ends. No. Edith said it before Piers could react. Douglas turned toward her. No, not yet. 2 proofs connected to the exact plates we have been watching are missing. Yes. And you want him to remain? I want him where his work can still be observed. Piers gave a quiet laugh. Edith ignored him. If you dismiss him on suspicion today, he leaves Glenstead with whatever materials still belong to his own practice, whatever explanations we have not obtained, and whatever purpose those proofs served. Suspicion is not proof. Douglas's jaw tightened. Edith saw the old instinct in him. Remove danger, end uncertainty, use rank to close the problem. You told me the next difficult choice would matter, he said. It does. He held her eyes for a moment, then looked back at Piers. Very well, the commission continues for now. Piers' satisfaction lasted less than a breath. Under Mr. Harland's review, Douglas continued, every plate and every paper count. Edith pointed toward the drying rack, and G3 should no longer remain under studio control. Piers stepped forward. Absolutely not. Why? She asked. It is a working negative. It is also the source of an unaccounted left-edge proof. Douglas said, Harland will secure it. Piers stared at him. You cannot expect me to work if every plate is locked away. Not every plate, Douglas replied. This one. Mr. Harland was summoned back from the house. In the presence of Edith, Douglas, Piers, and the assistant, he examined G3, recorded its identifying details and intact condition, then placed it in a separate padded box. Edith signed beneath the entry. Piers signed after reading it twice. Harland closed the box. G3 will remain in my locked cabinet, separately packaged from D6. If legitimate access is required, it will be recorded. He carried it away. For the first time since Winchester, Edith felt the investigation narrow around something current and dangerous. Both original glass negatives were now protected. The missing things were paper. Paper could be cut. Paper could be hidden. Paper could be made to stand where living people never had. Piers waited until Douglas had been called briefly into the orangery by a steward, and the assistant had moved into the darkroom before approaching Edith. You are wasting yourself here. Edith continued copying figures from the worksheet. That is a broad complaint. Winchester. Ah, a geographical insult. A professional observation. He lowered his voice. There are London studios that would pay very well for someone with your eye. Society clients. Serious patrons. You could stop photographing merchants who want to look richer than they are. Edith looked up. What would those studios want in return? Piers smiled. Discretion. About your missing paper, about an old family photograph that cannot be conclusively explained. O1, call it inconclusive, which it is. His Grace receives caution instead of obsession. You receive introductions your father could never have given you. The mention of her father removed the last ambiguity from the offer. Edith laid down her pencil. You are offering me London in exchange for a conclusion. I am offering you perspective. No. Think carefully. Pride is expensive. So is silence when another person chooses the price. His smile vanished. You may regret refusing. Then allow me the luxury of regretting my own decisions. Piers stepped back. Do not say I failed to offer you a future. You offered me yours. Douglas returned before Piers could answer. Piers left the pavilion without another word. Late afternoon softened the glass roof to grey. Edith remained at the work table after the others had gone to prepare for dinner, checking the missing proof entries once more. Douglas approached but stopped across from her. He offered you something. London. Douglas's expression hardened. For what? Calling your sister's photograph inconclusive and letting the matter die. And you refused. Edith raised one eyebrow. Do you need to ask? No. He looked down at the table. I suppose I do not. Silence settled between them. Then Douglas placed one hand near the edge without reaching toward her. The missing proofs frighten me more than the old photograph does. Edith waited. The old image belongs to something I failed years ago. These are happening now. One image of me, one of you. His voice lowered. I am afraid this is beginning again. Edith looked at the man who had once treated uncertainty as weakness. He was not ordering anyone removed. He was not pretending confidence. He was telling her he was afraid. She reached across the table and offered her hand. Douglas looked at it, then turned his own palm upward beneath hers without closing his fingers. He waited. Edith lowered her hand into his and squeezed first. Only then did his fingers fold around hers. The contact lasted. Warm, steady, deliberate. Then this time we watch it happen, she said. Douglas met her eyes. Together. Edith held his hand one moment longer. As long as you keep watching what is actually there. I will. She released him before the promise became larger than the evidence had earned. A footman entered through the orangery, carrying a stack of cream invitations. For tomorrow evening's photographic viewing, Your Grace. Douglas took one. Edith looked toward the empty place where G3 had stood, then toward the house where D6 was again locked away. Tomorrow the guests of Glenstead would gather to admire photographs and believe what the camera showed them. Somewhere beyond Harland's cabinet, 2 unmounted paper proofs had vanished. One carried Douglas's image, the other carried hers. By 7 the next evening, the long drawing room at Glenstead Park had been arranged as a private gallery. Finished portraits stood on easels, beneath shaded lamps. Smaller cartes de visite lay in orderly rows across 2 tables, and the house guests moved from image to image with the easy curiosity of people who expected amusement rather than consequence. Edith had spent most of the first half hour answering questions about exposure times and refusing, with equal calm, several suggestions that women must possess a special gift for flattering female sitters. Douglas remained among the guests near the far end of the room. He did not hover near her. After the hand she had offered him the previous afternoon, his distance felt deliberate rather than cold. D6 and G3 were both under Mr. Harland's locked keeping elsewhere in the house. The 2 missing paper proofs were not. Edith was explaining to an elderly gentleman why a stiff pose often produced a kinder likeness than forced movement when she noticed Piers Kirkby crossed the room toward Lady Marjorie Norcross. He carried a cream envelope. Marjorie accepted it with a curious glance. Piers bent slightly and said something too low for Edith to hear. Marjorie opened the envelope. The first card changed her face. Not shock, interest. She passed it to the woman beside her. A second card followed, then a third. Conversation thinned. Edith saw the shift before she understood it. One lady stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. An older guest, who had previously asked Edith whether she might photograph his married daughter, turned away too quickly. Another woman drew her own daughter half a step closer to her side. Edith's fingertips went cold. The room did not become silent, yet sound seemed to narrow until she could hear the dry whisper of card against glove leather and the measured tick of the mantel clock. Douglas reached Marjorie first. "What is that?" Marjorie looked at him, then at Edith. Perhaps Miss Loxley should explain. Douglas took the card from her hand. Edith watched his eyes move across it. His expression changed with such control that only the stillness betrayed anger. He turned the card toward her. The image appeared to show Douglas and Edith standing alone beside the conservatory screen near the photographic pavilion. Their bodies were angled toward each other. The distance between them was narrow enough to suggest privacy. Douglas's head seemed turned toward her. Edith's face appeared lifted in his direction. There was nothing indecent in the image. It did not need to be. Society could supply indecency without assistance. Edith knew at once that the scene had never happened. She had never stood with Douglas in that play. Not alone, not in those positions, not at any hour. "Where did these come from?" Douglas asked. Marjorie's composure remained polished. "Mr. Kirkby gave me the envelope. I assumed it contained additional photographs from the commission." "And when source what it contained?" "I was surprised." Douglas looked at the cards already moving between guests, not surprised enough to stop them traveling. Marjorie's chin lifted. "I did not pass everyone. You passed the first." Piers approached with an expression of professional regret so carefully arranged that Edith trusted it less than open hostility. "Your Grace, I intended to speak privately before the matter became theatrical." Douglas turned toward him. "Then, why place the cards in Lady Marjorie's hands? Because one concerns her social circle, and I believed a lady's judgment appropriate before I approached you." Marjorie did not correct the implication that she had merely been consulted. Edith saw the convenience between them, not loyalty, not partnership, something more selfish and therefore more believable. Piers looked at the card in Douglas's hand. "I cannot say what occurred. I can only say what the camera recorded." Douglas answered immediately. "That meeting never occurred. No hesitation. No glance toward Edith for reassurance. The words landed hard enough that several guests looked at him instead of the photograph. Edith felt the force of what he had chosen. 8 years earlier, another woman had denied a meeting while Douglas had asked the image to decide. Tonight, he had decided before the image could speak for him. Lady Marjorie recovered first. "With respect, Your Grace, you are one of the people shown. Your denial cannot settle your own reputation." "No," Edith said. Every eye turned toward her. She stepped closer. "It cannot." Piers's gaze sharpened. "At least Miss Loxley understands the difficulty." "I understand that neither rank nor outrage is evidence." Piers folded his hands behind his back. "Then, perhaps we should discuss expertise. Miss Loxley is the only person at Glenstead besides myself with the technical knowledge required to manufacture an image of this kind. She has access to the pavilion. She has examined plates. She has challenged my methods from the moment she arrived." He paused, allowing the room to build the rest before he supplied it. "And if a woman wished to create the appearance of intimacy with a duke, technical skill would make the attempt considerably easier." The insult was cleaner than anything Marjorie could have said, because it used Edith's competence against her. Her profession became opportunity. Her independence became ambition. Her face became motive again. Douglas stepped toward Piers. "Careful." Edith raised one hand. "No, Your Grace." Douglas looked at her. "He is accusing you of fabricating this. Then let him finish. I will not stand by while he turns your own work into an accusation. If you threaten him, now, they will remember your authority before they remember what is true." The muscles in Douglas's jaw tightened. For a second, Edith saw the struggle. Then he stopped. "Very well." That mattered more than anyone else in the room could know. Edith held out her hand. "Lady Marjorie, may I see one of the cards?" Marjorie gave her one reluctantly. Edith took it by the edges and moved beneath the nearest lamp. Her fingers were cold but steady. First Douglas, his body angle, the position of his left arm, the slight turn of the sleeve. D6. She knew it. Then herself. Her left hand sat at precisely the same height she remembered from G3. Beneath her hip, the dark fabric fell into the same narrow lines. One outer fold turned inward into the small triangular crease she had noticed when she checked the group negative. Her pulse slowed. Fear gave way to structure. Piers watched her. "Do you recognize your own work?" he asked. "I recognize 2 separate sittings." A murmur moved through the guests. Edith indicated Douglas's figure. His Grace is standing as he stood for D6, the solo portrait made on the second morning. Then she pointed to herself, "And I am standing exactly as I stood at the left edge of G3, the smaller group plate made the following day." Piers gave a soft laugh. "People may stand the same way twice." "Yes." Edith looked up, "which is why resemblance is not proof." Marjorie's expression shifted, disappointed that Edith had not overreached. "Then you have disproved nothing." "Not yet." Edith turned so the room could hear her without forcing her voice. "Do not believe His Grace because he is a duke. Do not believe me because I say the meeting never happened. Do not believe Mr. Kirkby because he can place a photograph in your hand." The room went still. "Give me 6 days. On the 6th morning, I'll show you what you're actually looking at." Marjorie stared at her. "You intend to remain at Glenstead after this?" "Yes." "You would stay while these photographs are being discussed, especially while they are being discussed." Douglas spoke quietly beside her. "You are under no obligation to stay." Edith turned toward him. "I know. If you want my carriage, it is yours. If you want the guests gone, they will leave tonight." Several people shifted at that. Edith understood the offer. Escape, shelter, rank. Each one would feel good for an hour and cost her more afterward. Neither. Douglas held her gaze. "You are certain?" "Yes." Edith faced the room again. "Anyone who has seen the accusation may remain long enough to see the answer." Douglas inclined his head. "Then they remain." Edith looked at the card in her hand. Whatever else happened, this exact piece of paper could not become another object. Everyone remembered differently. Mr. Harland. The solicitor had appeared in the doorway after hearing the disturbance. He approached with his memorandum case. Edith handed him the card. "Preserve this exact one. Record that it came from Lady Marjorie's envelope tonight, and that I examined it before it left my hand." Harland opened a clean envelope, wrote C1 across it, then added the date, source, and transfer in his memorandum. "It remains with me from this moment." He slid the card inside. Marjorie watched the envelope disappear into his case. Piers watched too, but his confidence did not diminish. If anything, it settled more deeply. 6 days, he said. Edith turned. You sound amused. I am trying to save you time. Douglas's attention sharpened. Piers reached inside his coat and drew out a folded note bearing his studio mark. You are building your answer around missing paper proofs and copied poses. At present, then you may not need 6 days. Edith studied him. Why? Piers smiled without warmth. Because I have the original negative. For the first time since Edith recognized D6 and G3 inside the false card, uncertainty returned. Not because she believed Glass incapable of deception. She knew better. The danger was that almost everyone else in the room did not. By breakfast the next morning, the guests at Glenstead Park had discovered a new kind of courtesy toward Edith. No one accused her openly. That would have required courage. Instead, conversations ended sooner when she approached. Greetings became more formal, and one woman who had spent the previous day praising Loxley photographic rooms suddenly found the view from the breakfast room windows more compelling than anything Edith might say. Edith accepted every alteration exactly as it was offered. She would not shrink merely because other people had decided a false image deserved more confidence than her own memory. At 9 o'clock, she entered the photographic pavilion with Mr. Harland and Douglas already waiting. D6 remained in Harland's locked cabinet, separately boxed, its crescent scratch unchanged since the recorded printing session 2 days earlier. G3 remained in a different padded box under the same keeping. C1, the exact false card, taken from Lady Marjorie's envelope the previous night, rested inside the marked envelope in Harland's memorandum case. Nothing had been opened for curiosity. Edith intended to keep it that way. Piers Kirkby arrived carrying a flat mahogany case beneath one arm. He looked rested. That irritated her more than triumph would have. You asked for 6 days, he said. I may have spared you 5. Edith looked at the case. You said you possessed the original negative. I do. Then before you open it, tell Mr. Harland exactly what you mean by original. Piers smiled faintly. Already building an escape. Already preventing you from changing your definition later. Harland opened his memorandum book. Douglas stood near the far side of the table and said nothing. Piers set the case down. The plate inside produced the carts shown last night. Edith did not move. That is not the question. His expression hardened. Then ask it. Was the plate exposed while His Grace and I were physically standing together before the camera? Yes, Harland wrote. At the conservatory screen shown in the image, yes. At the same time, obviously. Nothing becomes obvious merely because you say it impatiently. Piers placed one hand on the closed case. Paper can be cut, Miss Loxley. Paper can be pasted. A clever woman may argue with paper until everyone in Hampshire is exhausted. A glass negative cannot be explained away so easily. Douglas looked toward Edith. She heard the confidence underneath Piers's contempt. Not merely confidence in the plate, confidence in what other people believed a plate meant. Society understood photographs as records of what stood before a lens. Few people asked what, precisely, had been placed there. Piers was wagering that the word glass would end the argument before technique could begin. Edith turned to Harland. Please record the condition of the case before it is opened, and that Mr. Kirkby has personally identified the plate inside as a direct exposure of His Grace and me standing together from life. Harland noted the clasp, the case, the time, and Piers's claim. "Who has handled the plate since its exposure?" he asked. Piers hesitated only slightly. "My assistant may have handled ordinary studio work." "Then record that too," Edith said. Piers gave her a cold look. "You intend to make procedure substitute for proof?" "No, I intend to make proof survive procedure." Harland finished writing. Only then did Piers open the mahogany case. Inside, a glass negative rested beneath black paper and folded cloth. He lifted it carefully by the edges. Edith did not reach for it. "Place it on the viewing stand." Piers's mouth curved. "Afraid to touch the truth?" "Afraid. You will later claim I touched it before anyone else saw its condition." The smile disappeared. He set the plate upright where the pale morning light could pass through it. Edith's own image appeared beside Douglas's exactly as it had on C1. The conservatory screen behind them looked convincing. Douglas's body angled toward hers. Edith's face seemed raised in his direction. At an ordinary viewing distance, the scene looked complete. That was its danger. Harland came nearer. Douglas remained where he was. Edith took her magnifier from its case, but kept it above the glass without contact. "His Grace's position matches D6, she said. "Mine matches the left portion of G3. "You already said that from the card," Piers replied. "And you already answered that resemblance alone proves nothing." "Correct." That seemed to surprise him. Edith moved the lens over Douglas's coat. Near the outer shoulder, the tonal transition looked subtly wrong. Not a clear-cut line. More like the faint grain of paper where depth should have continued naturally. She shifted toward her own sleeve. Another irregularity. "Smaller. What do you see?" Douglas asked. "Something worth comparing under controlled light." Piers laughed softly. "A magnificent retreat." Edith straightened. "No. A refusal to give you the conclusion before the comparison." She looked toward Harland. "I do not want D6 or G3 opened today merely because Mr. Kirkby has brought us something dramatic. They remain sealed until we are ready to examine all three together." Douglas nodded. "Agreed." Piers looked from one to the other. "You will lock away the very object you demanded." "You brought it voluntarily," Edith said. "And you are relying upon it to accuse me. If you believe it is decisive, you should want its condition preserved." That caught him. Refusing custody would look like fear. Accepting it allowed him to maintain confidence. His vanity chose for him. "Fine," he said. "Lock it away. When you run out of theories, you may all remember who gave you the original." Harland produced a separate padded plate box. Before the glass went inside, he recorded it as S1, the plate presented by Piers Kirkby and claimed by him to show Douglas Thackwell and Edith Loxley photographed together directly from life. Piers signed beneath the statement. Douglas signed as witness to the presentation. Edith signed only to the condition in which she had observed the plate. Not to the truth of Piers's claim. Harland wrapped S1, sealed the box, and carried it toward the house himself. "It will remain separately locked from D6 and G3. "As it should," Edith said. Piers watched the box disappear. 5 days remain. "Then you have 5 days to enjoy your confidence." He left the pavilion without answering. When Harland returned, he brought C1 but nothing else. Edith examined the exact card under the stronger magnifier. Along Douglas's coat, she found a faint surface disturbance similar to what she had seen on S1. Around her own figure, the background softened unevenly. She marked the locations in her notes, but did not declare them proof. Similarity could guide a later comparison. It could not replace one. By noon, Piers had gone to supervise an outdoor sitting with 2 guests, leaving the pavilion quieter. Harland entered from the house, carrying a sealed letter. "This came by special messenger," he said. "For me personally." Douglas turned from the window. "From whom?" Harland examined the outside. "A woman who does not wish her name repeated." Edith lowered the magnifier. Harland broke the outer seal and read in silence. His expression became more guarded with each line. "She has heard that Mr. Kirkby's earlier photographic work is being questioned at Glenstead." Douglas stepped closer. "How?" "She does not say. Only that years ago, a photograph circulated showing her beside a gentleman in circumstances she swore had never occurred." Edith felt the old story repeat itself with a different face. "Does she still possess the photograph?" "Yes." "Will she permit examination?" "Privately. By you, His Grace, and me." Harland looked down at the letter. "She is explicit that her name is not to be disclosed. The image is not to be displayed to the house guests, and no copy is to be made without permission." Douglas's first reaction came quickly. If the same method appears, it could establish a pattern. Edith looked at him. He stopped before she answered. The silence changed his expression. 8 years earlier, he had wanted certainty badly enough to make his sister carry the cost. Now, another woman's humiliation had appeared precisely when it might help protect Edith. Douglas looked back at Harland's letter, then at her. "What do you think?" The question mattered more than the answer he had almost given. Edith said, "I think we accept only what she has offered." Douglas waited. "Even if public evidence from her would clear you sooner." "Especially then." Harland remained silent. Edith set the magnifier down. "I will not prove that I deserve dignity by taking hers away." Douglas looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face shifted, not toward admiration alone, but toward understanding. "Then that is the rule." He turned to Harland. "Her name remains private. Her photograph remains private. If she permits examination, we examine it and nothing more." Harland nodded. "I will answer immediately." Outside the pavilion, laughter drifted faintly from the lawn, where Piers was arranging another portrait. Inside, S1 now sat under lock beside 2 protected negatives, and somewhere beyond Glenstead, another woman still possessed an image she had once been told to believe over herself. Edith had 5 mornings left after this one, before the promised reckoning. The question was no longer only whether she could expose a lie. It was whether they could do so without becoming the kind of people who believed another woman's pain was simply evidence waiting to be used. Sewer. The private photograph arrived at Glenstead shortly, before 10 the next morning, in a plain packet addressed to Mr. Harland and carried by a messenger who would give no name beyond the instructions he had been paid to deliver. Harland did not take it to the photographic pavilion. Instead, he asked Edith and Douglas to join him in his temporary office beside the library, where the door could remain open without exposing the contents of his desk to anyone passing through the corridor. D6, G3 and S1 remained separately boxed inside the locked cabinet behind him. C1 rested in its marked envelope among his current papers. Nothing connected to the public accusation had been moved for the sake of convenience. Harland laid the packet on a clean sheet of paper. The outer seal is intact. Edith stood opposite him. Douglas remained near the open doorway rather than looming over the desk. "Does she repeat her conditions?" Edith asked. Harland unfolded the accompanying note without reading the woman's name aloud. "Yes, you, His Grace, and I may examine the photograph. Her identity is not to be disclosed. The image is not to be shown to the guests. No copy is to be made. The original is to be returned today." Douglas nodded. "Clear?" Harland opened the inner wrapping. The photograph was older than the Glenstead carts, mounted simply and without decorative border. It showed a woman beside a gentleman near a garden wall. Their bodies were close enough to imply secrecy while displaying nothing openly improper. Edith felt an immediate anger at the economy of it. A lie did not require indecency when suggestion could make respectable people finish the accusation themselves. She did not touch the print. Place it nearer the window, please. Harland shifted the paper beneath it. Edith raised her magnifier. Along the woman's sleeve, she found a faint boundary where the tonal depth changed too abruptly. Near the gentleman's shoulder, another irregularity appeared. Lower down, the background grain seemed slightly different on either side of the figures. Edith altered the angle of the lens. There. Douglas came nearer, but stopped before his coat could brush her arm. The same thing. The same broad kind of thing. A paper composite, possibly a rephotographed paper arrangement. Edith straightened. Not enough to say who made it. Not enough to say this specific image came from Mr. Kirkby, but enough to say the photograph does not behave like a simple live sitting. Harland made a private note that contained no identifying name. Douglas looked at the woman's face for only a moment before deliberately shifting his attention to the mount. If she were willing to let us show this publicly, it would make it harder for Kirkby to claim there has never been another disputed image. The advantage was real. Edith heard it immediately. So did Douglas. His expression changed before she answered. He looked back at Harland's letter. No. Harland's pencil paused. Douglas continued, quieter now. She has already answered that question. Edith watched him. Yes. Then her name does not enter that room. There was no audience to reward the decision. No one beyond Edith and Harland would know what Douglas had given up by making it. That made the choice matter more, Harland asked. And the photograph? It goes back exactly as promised. Douglas looked toward Edith. Even if it would shorten what you have to endure here? Edith held his gaze, especially then. I thought so. Something warm moved beneath the strain Edith had carried since the false carts appeared. She stepped closer and touched 2 fingers lightly to Douglas's sleeve. He looked down at the contact, then back at her face. You did not decide for her, Edith said. Not this time. The words were quiet. Douglas did not defend himself from what they implied. No. Edith let her fingers remain against his sleeve for one breath. Then she slid her hand down into his open palm. It was not the first time she had held his hand. That had happened across the pavilion table when fear had made him admit that the old pattern seemed to be beginning again. This felt different. Then she had steadied him. Now she was answering what he had become willing to do. Douglas did not close his fingers until Edith did. When she tightened her hand, he returned the pressure gently. I cannot give my sister back the choice I took from her, he said. No, but I can stop taking it from someone else. Edith looked at him steadily. That is what the next difficult choice looks like. A faint, pained understanding crossed his face. Edith released his hand first, not because she regretted the contact, but because she did not want gratitude or grief to force either of them farther than trust had earned. Harland, with the tact of a man who had found his memorandum suddenly absorbing, refolded the woman's letter. The photograph returned to its original wrapping. No copy was made. No name was entered into any public account. Before noon, the same trusted messenger carried the packet away from Glenstead. By late afternoon, a light rain had begun tapping against the glass roof of the photographic pavilion. Edith was examining C1 under the stronger magnifier, while Harland reviewed the day's notes nearby. The social temperature of the house had not improved. Guests remained polite enough to preserve their own dignity while withholding belief from hers. Edith had ceased noticing each individual slight. She preferred to spend that energy on the card. Douglas entered carrying a sealed envelope. "This was delivered to me 10 minutes ago." Edith looked at the handwriting and the small studio mark impressed into the corner. "Mr. Kirkby." "Yes." Douglas did not break the seal alone. He crossed directly to the work table. "Harland should hear it too." The solicitor closed his memorandum book. Douglas opened the letter and read in silence. His face hardened line by line. "What does he want?" Edith asked. Douglas held the paper out to her. "You should read it yourself." She took it. The wording was careful. Piers did not openly call it a bargain. He wrote of discretion, unnecessary reputational damage, and the possibility of preventing further copies from leaving the circles already involved. The conditions appeared near the end. Douglas was to dismiss Edith from Glenstead, terminate the inquiry into the old Thackwell photograph, and state publicly that no manipulation had been established. In return, Piers would ensure that the remaining cards did not travel to London or neighbouring estates. Edith read the final paragraph twice. "He is threatening wider circulation while pretending to offer restraint." "Yes." Douglas's voice was flat. "And he expects me to decide whether your reputation is worth the price of silence." Edith looked at him. "What would you have done 8 years ago?" The question struck cleanly. Harland remained silent. Douglas considered before answering. "I might have taken the bargain." He did not soften it. Why? Because it would have looked like control. The image would stop traveling. The house would become quiet. I could have told myself I had protected everyone. Edith folded the letter once along its existing crease, and now Douglas looked directly at her. "Now I show you the price before I pretend I have the right to pay it for you." The answer settled something inside her. "Then we refuse." "Entirely?" "Entirely." Douglas did not argue that the consequences might fall harder on her. "Agreed." Harland extended his hand. "May I retain the letter?" Douglas nodded. Edith passed it across. Harland entered the time received, the sender, and the transfer into his memorandum, then placed the original letter among his protected papers. If Mr. Kirkby later denies attempting to stop the inquiry, this may matter. "Only then," Edith said. "It is not the proof of the photograph." Agreed. A movement near the orangery doorway caught her attention. The junior assistant stood just inside, cap held between both hands. His face was pale. Piers was nowhere behind him. "Miss Loxley?" Edith set down the magnifier. "Yes." His eyes moved toward Mr. Harland, then briefly toward Douglas. "I need to tell you something." His voice nearly failed, but only if Mr. Harland is present. Edith did not ask what. She remembered his trembling hands, his hesitation over D6, and the careful way he had said he did not know where the missing proofs were now. "He will be present." The young man swallowed. "Tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning. Douglas took one step forward as though a question had risen in him, then stopped himself. Edith noticed. The assistant had chosen the conditions under which he could speak. Pressing him tonight would only replace Piers's pressure with theirs. "Go," Edith said gently. "We will hear exactly what you saw tomorrow." He nodded and disappeared into the orangery. Edith looked toward Harland's locked cabinet, beyond the house wall, where 3 separate glass negatives waited under controlled keeping. They had refused the easiest witness. They had refused the easiest bargain. Now the frightened young man who had watched D6 disappear behind a lock was finally ready to explain what had frightened him. The junior assistant arrived before 9 the next morning and refused to sit until Mr. Harland entered the photographic pavilion. Edith did not question the condition. The young man stood beside the long work table, with his cap twisted between both hands, his face drawn from a night in which sleep had plainly done little for him. The housekeeper remained near the open orangery doors at Edith's request, close enough to witness what was said without crowding him. Douglas stood farther back beside the windows. He had chosen the position himself. A duke's presence could turn fear into agreement, and no one in that room wanted testimony purchased by rank. D6, G3, and S1 remained separately boxed inside Mr. Harland's locked cabinet. C1 and Piers Kirkby's suppression letter remained among the solicitor's protected papers. No evidence had been brought into the pavilion before the assistant spoke. Edith faced him. "Yesterday you said you needed to tell me something." He nodded. "Yes, miss." "Then tell me only what you saw, not what you think happened. Not what Mr. Kirkby intended, unless he told you directly. What you actually saw." The young man glanced once toward Douglas, then back to Edith. It was the extra proofs. Edith kept her voice even. "Which ones?" "G3 first. After the smaller group plate, Mr. Kirkby told me to make another proof from the left edge, the part where you stood." "Was that entered on the mounting list?" "No, miss. Why not?" "He told me not to enter it." Mr. Harland began writing. Edith asked, "And D6? The assistant swallowed. On the morning Mr. Harland brought the plate back for the agreed printing, there were meant to be 2 working proofs. Douglas remained still. "Go on," Edith said. "I made the 2. Then Mr. Kirkby told me to expose 1 more sheet before the plate went back into Mr. Harland's box." "Did you alter the glass negative?" "No, miss." "Did anyone remove D6 from the printing area while Mr. Harland had released it?" "No." "What happened after the 3rd sheet was exposed?" Mr. Harland checked the plate again. It was returned to him. The scratch was the same. Harland's pencil paused long enough for him to look up. "That agrees with my return entry." Edith nodded. "And the 3rd paper proof?" The young man's fingers tightened around his cap. "I gave it to Mr. Kirkby." "Did you record it on the mounting list?" "No." "Did you record the sheet anywhere?" The paper use line already showed 3 exposures. Edith understood. That was the discrepancy she had found. "What happened to the extra G3 proof?" "I gave that to him too. After that?" The assistant looked toward the workroom door. His voice dropped. "That evening, I went back because I had left a plate holder near the washing shelf. Mr. Kirkby was at the table." "What did you see?" "Paper figures." Douglas's face hardened, but he did not interrupt. "Describe them." "His Grace from D6. You from G3. How did you recognize them?" "I printed both proofs." "His Grace had the same turn through the body. You had the same hand and the same fold in your dress." Edith felt the false cart rise in memory, but she did not allow recognition to lead the testimony. What was Mr. Kirkby doing with them? They were cut out. He had them arranged against dark card. There was another photograph behind them, a background. "Did you see him cut them?" The assistant hesitated. "I saw the scissors and the trimmed pieces, but I didn't see every cut." "Then we say you saw them already cut." He nodded quickly. "Were they attached to the card?" "Lightly, I think. I saw paste near one edge." "Did you see Mr. Kirkby photograph that arrangement?" "No." The young man looked ashamed. Edith shook her head once. "There is nothing wrong with not seeing what you did not see." His eyes lifted. "The next morning he told me to prepare the apparatus for copying flat work." Did he say what would be copied? No. Did you see the arrangement still on the table? It was covered. And later? Later I saw a fresh negative drying. What was on it? His Grace and you together. Douglas drew one slow breath. Edith continued. Did Mr. Kirkby call that plate S1? No, miss. I never heard that name until Mr. Harland used it. Did you see the actual exposure that created that negative? No. Did you see him retouch it? No. Did you retouch it? No. Then none of those things belongs in your statement. Relief moved through the assistant's face. Precision was giving him somewhere safe to stand. Mr. Harland wrote each limitation as carefully as the observations. Edith asked, "When did you understand that the paper figures might be used against me?" "At the viewing, when Lady Marjorie opened the envelope." His voice became unsteady. "I saw the card and knew where the poses came from." "Why did you not speak that night?" "I was afraid." No one filled the silence. Mr. Kirkby had said before that no London studio would take an assistant he called dishonest. "My mother depends on what I send her. I thought if the cards were taken back, perhaps nothing more would happen." "Why? Speak now." "Yesterday I heard him dictating part of the letter to His Grace." Edith's attention sharpened. "Which part?" "That if you were sent away and the old inquiry stopped, the other cards could be kept from travelling farther." "I didn't hear the whole finished letter." Mr. Harland recorded the distinction. Douglas finally spoke. "Has Kirkby ordered anything removed from Glenstead?" The assistant nodded. "This morning he told me to pack the trimming knife, black mounting card, and copying frame for London." Edith asked, "Where are they?" "Still in the workroom cupboard. I came here first." Douglas looked toward Harland. "Can they be secured?" Edith answered before the solicitor did. "Inventoried, yes, but not treated as proof by themselves. Every working studio may possess those things." Douglas inclined his head. "Agreed." Harland read the material portions of the statement back to the assistant. Once, the young man stopped him. Harland had written that he saw Piers preparing the composite. "I saw the figures arranged, sir," he said. "I didn't see the exposure." Harland crossed out the phrase and corrected it. Only then did the assistant sign. The housekeeper witnessed his signature. The pavilion door opened before the ink had fully dried. Piers entered, took in the assembled group, and understood at once. His gaze settled on the assistant. "What have you done?" The young man straightened despite the tremor in his hands. "Told them what I saw." Piers' face became very still. "Then you are dismissed." Douglas moved one step forward. Edith did not stop him this time. The question was no longer whether Piers remained useful to the inquiry. It was whether a frightened employee could be punished into silence after speaking. "Wages already earned will be paid," Douglas said. Piers turned toward him. "He is my assistant, and earned wages remain earned." Douglas looked at Harland. "Confirm what is due under the existing arrangement. If Mr. Kirkby refuses payment, advance it through the Glenstead commission account and record the amount for recovery. Nothing beyond those wages is to depend on his testimony." Harland nodded. "Understood." The assistant looked stunned. Douglas did not ask for gratitude. Piers did. "You are building your case from frightened boys and old men who remember studio habits from 8 years ago." Edith met his gaze. "No, we are building it from what each person can actually prove. A knife and black card prove nothing." "Correct." That answer unsettled him more than accusation would have. "That is why they are not the argument." Piers left without another word. Harland and the housekeeper went to inventory the ordinary studio tools. The assistant was taken toward the servants' hall while his wages were calculated. When the pavilion finally quieted, Edith remained beside the work table. The case was not perfect. The assistant had not witnessed the exposure of S1. The retired printer had not seen O1 fabricated, yet the current false photograph could now be proved without using the unnamed woman who had trusted them with her private shame. D6, G3, missing paper proofs, cut figures, flat copy preparation, a fresh combined negative, S1. Edith pressed her fingertips against the table edge. We can prove the current photograph without her. Douglas stood several feet away. Yes, relief came badly. For 10 days, Edith had held herself upright beneath professional contempt, suspicion, social avoidance, and the knowledge that her own likeness had been turned into a weapon. Now that the structure beneath the lie had begun to show itself, the strength required to remain composed suddenly felt heavier rather than lighter. Douglas saw it. He did not cross the space between them. Edith, she looked at him, his voice lowered. May I hold you? The question undid something protection never could have. He had left her the room to refuse. Edith crossed it herself. Her hands came to rest against the front of his coat, and Douglas's arms closed around her carefully. Not possessively, not with urgency. He held her as though the only thing he meant to take from the moment was permission to remain in it. Edith let her forehead rest against his shoulder. His breathing changed beneath her cheek. So did hers. The open orangery remained beyond them, and distant footsteps moved through the house. Nothing about the embrace was hidden. Nothing about it belonged to anyone else. Do you want me to let go? Douglas asked quietly. Edith tightened her hands against his coat. No. Only then did his arms hold her more securely. No kiss followed. No promise turned relief into a claim. There was only warmth, steadiness, and the rare luxury of not having to defend herself for a few breaths. When Edith finally stepped back, Douglas released her at once. Their eyes met. Neither pretended the embrace had been accidental. 3 days remain before the 6th morning, Edith said. Douglas glanced toward the house, where D6, G3, and S1 waited separately under Harlan's keeping. What do you need? Edith's breathing had steadied. Something simple enough that no one in that room can hide behind confusion. She looked toward the camera. Now we show them how a glass negative can faithfully record a false scene. The following morning, Edith chose 2 harmless duplicate portraits from the Glenstead Commission and laid them side by side on the pavilion work table. Neither image belonged to anyone involved in the scandal. One showed an elderly gentleman seated beside a carved column. The other showed a married woman standing before a painted garden backdrop. D6, G3, and S1 remained separately boxed inside Mr. Harlan's locked cabinet. C1 remained in its marked envelope among his protected papers. Piers Kirkby's suppression letter remained there as well. Edith had no intention of opening any disputed evidence, merely to make a demonstration more dramatic. Douglas stood across the table, while Harlan waited beside him, with his memorandum book closed. These 2 people were photographed separately, Edith said. They never stood together for this sitting. Douglas looked from one portrait to the other, and you are going to make it appear that they did, without altering either original image. Edith took a small trimming knife from her own equipment case. She cut carefully around the seated gentleman, then around the woman, preserving enough of each figure to keep their posture recognizable. She placed the 2 paper figures against a piece of dark card and adjusted their relative positions. Behind them, she set part of the garden backdrop from the woman's duplicate print. From several feet away, The arrangement remained obviously constructed. Douglas frowned. It looks crude, because you know what you are looking at. Edith nudged one figure a fraction nearer the other. Imagine finer trimming. Imagine the obvious edges lightly worked upon afterward. Most importantly, imagine that instead of showing anyone this paper arrangement, I point the camera at it. Douglas looked toward the camera, then back to the figures. You expose a fresh plate, yes, and the new negative contains both people. Yes, even though neither person stood together before the lens. Only their paper likenesses did. Harland leaned closer without touching anything, so the glass negative would be real. Real as an object, Edith said. Real as a record of what the camera saw. What it would not prove is that the scene itself happened. Douglas studied the figures for several seconds. She saw understanding settle, rather than merely flash across his face. That is Kirkby's wager. Exactly. He thinks everyone will hear the words original negative and stop asking what actually stood before the camera. Yes, Edith did not expose another plate. There was no need. She marked the two cut portraits, plainly as demonstration material, and placed the scraps together so they could never be mistaken for evidence. Tomorrow I do not want the room admiring clever technique, she said. I want them following one simple chain. Harland opened his memorandum. Then let us settle the order. Edith nodded. D6 first. Douglas answered, before Harland could ask why. The crescent scratch. Yes. They must see that defect on the original portrait before they see S1. Harland wrote. G3 second. My original position at the far left, Edith said. The hand and the triangular fold in the dress. S1 third, Douglas said. Only after they know what to compare, Edith replied. Then C1, Harland said. The exact circulating card from Lady Marjorie's envelope. Edith nodded. After that, the assistant. Only what he actually saw. Piers ordered both source proofs. He saw the paper figures already cut and arranged. He prepared apparatus for copying flat work. He later saw a fresh combined negative. He did not witness the exposure of S1. And the retired printer from Winchester, Harland said, last. Edith replied. He establishes that Piers knew and used the method years ago. Nothing more. Douglas looked toward her. The suppression letter. Reserve it. If Piers denies trying to stop the inquiry, it may matter. It is not the foundation of the photograph case. My sister's image? Edith shook her head. No. Douglas's expression tightened, but he did not argue. And the other woman's photograph is already returned. Exactly. Edith looked at him. Tomorrow must stand without displaying either woman's humiliation as entertainment. It will. Harland finished the sequence. Who speaks first? Douglas looked directly at Edith. You do. Do you want to lead? She asked. No. There was no wounded pride in the answer. Then I will. There may be questions only you can answer. I will answer those. Edith held his gaze. And if Piers attacks me personally? Something cold moved through Douglas's face. It vanished under control before he spoke. Then I will remember that anger is not evidence. Edith almost smiled. That may require discipline. I have had nearly 2 weeks of instruction. 10 days. It has felt educational. Harland lowered his eyes toward the memorandum, hiding what might have been amusement. Douglas continued, more quietly. I will stand where you can see me and speak only when it is mine to answer. The promise affected Edith more than any offer to clear the house or silence Piers. He was not promising to win for her. He was promising not to take her place. Then we are ready, she said. The next day passed without a new clue. Exactly as Edith intended, Harland reviewed the custody entries. The assistant's signed statement remained unchanged. The retired printer received instructions to arrive the following morning. No disputed plate was opened. No witness was rehearsed beyond being reminded to answer only what he personally knew. Late on that second afternoon, the light through the orangery glass had begun turning softer when Edith returned her notes to the case. The drawing room beyond remained occupied. Voices carried faintly through the open connecting doors, enough to make the pavilion private, only in the limited sense that no one else happened to be standing inside it. Her father's worn pearwood lens cap rested beside the closed camera. Douglas entered and stopped several feet away. "Edith," she looked up. Yes, he seemed less certain than he had when confronting peers or ordering records preserved. That difference drew her attention immediately. "I have spent most of today thinking about tomorrow." Sensible, and part of it thinking about afterward. Her pulse altered. She set down the pencil she had been holding. Douglas continued, "There is something I want that has nothing to do with whether you prove anything in that gallery." Edith waited. "I want more than your respect." The words were steady, but she could see what they cost him. "I also refuse to make my support tomorrow dependent upon what you feel for me. If the room turns against you, I will still say what I know. If you prove everything exactly as you intend, that will not give me a claim on you." Edith watched him without speaking. 8 years earlier, uncertainty had frightened him into believing the thing that looked most definite. Now he was standing before her and leaving the answer he wanted entirely outside his control. "Douglas." His expression changed at hearing his Christian name. "What are you asking?" He did not step nearer. "Permission? For what?" A breath passed before he answered. "To kiss you." The directness warmed something beneath Edith's composure, but there was no pressure in it, no gratitude demanded, no rescue to repay. She could refuse, and the morning would remain unchanged. "If you're asking permission, you have it." Douglas remained still for one heartbeat longer, as though making certain the answer had not been given merely but because he wanted it. Edith ended the distance herself. She stepped toward him. He bent slowly, and their first kiss was gentle enough to leave choice visible inside it. Nothing hurried, nothing demanded more. Edith lifted one hand to his face and rested her fingers against his cheek. Then she kissed him back. The second contact lasted slightly longer, warm and deliberate, before they separated by mutual instinct. Douglas did not reach for her again. He remained close enough that she could see the change in his breathing. Edith knew her own had changed as well. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The house beyond the orangery continued exactly as before. Someone laughed in the drawing room. A door closed farther down the corridor. The world had not shifted because they had kissed, yet the space between them had. "Tomorrow," Edith said softly. Douglas's eyes stayed on hers. "Tomorrow? After the truth? Say what you mean." Something deeper than amusement entered his face. "I will." Edith lowered her hand from his cheek. Neither apologized for the kiss. Neither tried to turn it into a promise before the promise could be freely spoken. She stepped back toward the work table and closed her case. In Mr. Harland's cabinet, D6, G3, and S1 waited separately under lock. C1 waited in its marked envelope. No new evidence remained to discover. The 6th morning was next. Tomorrow Edith would show the room what the camera had truly seen. Afterward, if Douglas still wished to speak, she would hear what his heart had been trying not to claim before truth had finished its work. The 6th morning arrived clear enough that the tall windows of Glenstead's picture gallery required no lamps. By 10 o'clock, the central table held only Mr. Harland's memorandum book and the sealed boxes from his locked cabinet. The guests who had seen the false carters formed a loose semicircle. Lady Marjorie Norcross sat near the windows, composed in posture and pale around the mouth. Piers Kirkby stood opposite Edith, with his professional calm restored. The junior assistant waited beside the housekeeper. The retired printer from Winchester stood farther back. Douglas took the place he had promised Edith, not before her or behind her, but at one side of the table where she could see him. His sister's old photograph was not in the room. The unnamed woman's photograph had already been returned. Edith would not purchase her own vindication with either woman's humiliation. She looked around the gallery. 6 mornings ago, several of you saw a photograph that appeared to show His Grace and me beside the conservatory screen. I said I would show you what you were actually looking at. Piers folded his arms, and I provided the original negative. You provided a glass negative, Edith said. You also stated that it was exposed while His Grace and I physically stood together before the camera. Because that is what happened, then the glass should survive comparison. Edith turned to Harland. D6 first, please. Harland read the custody entries before opening the box. D6 had been made on the second morning, before any proof was printed. Its crescent scratch across Douglas's left sleeve had been recorded, and the plate locked away. On the 6th morning, Harland had released it once for the 2 agreed working proofs, checked it before printing, received it back the same morning, and recorded that the scratch remained unchanged. No later release had occurred. He placed D6 on the viewing stand. Edith indicated the pale curved mark. Remember this scratch. It belongs to the glass plate, not to His Grace's coat. Several guests leaned nearer. G3, Edith said. Harland opened the separate box containing the smaller group negative and read its custody entry. Edith pointed to her figure at the far left. My left hand, the position of the fingers, and this triangular fold beneath my hip. Piers sighed. A woman may stand the same way twice. Yes, that is why we are not finished. Harland brought forward S1. Before breaking the seal, he read Piers's signed claim from the 8th morning that S1 was a direct exposure of Douglas and Edith standing together from life. Only then did he open the box. Edith placed D6 beside S1. His Grace's left sleeve. The same crescent crossed the same sleeve at the same angle inside S1. One gentleman moved closer. That is the same defect. Yes, Edith said. If S1 came from a new live sitting, a scratch belonging to D6 could not appear in exactly the same place on His Grace's body. It appears because the image from D6 was copied into S1. Piers stepped forward. Or because the later plate suffered a similar scratch. Then we compare mine. Harland positioned G3 beside S1. Edith indicated her hand. Same height, same angle. Then the dress. Same triangular fold, same direction. She lifted the magnifier. Now the boundaries around both figures. The transition carries a faint paper texture, and the light on His Grace's face does not fall from the same direction as the light on mine. 2 separate sittings remain inside one supposed moment. Piers' jaw tightened. You are interpreting blemishes. Then let us follow the paper. Harland opened C1, the exact card transferred from Edith on the night of the scandal. This is the card from Lady Marjorie's envelope. It matches S1 and bears Mr. Kirkby's studio blind stamp. Which proves only that my studio printed it, Piers said. Correct. Edith's refusal to overstate the point drew more attention than accusation would have, so we ask where the figures came from." The assistant stepped forward and repeated what he had signed. Piers had ordered an extra unmounted proof from the left edge of G3, when Harland later released D6 for the 2 agreed working prints. Piers ordered 1 additional unmounted proof during that same session. The assistant gave both extra proofs to Piers. Later, he saw paper figures of Douglas and Edith already cut and arranged against dark card with a background behind them. The following morning, Piers told him to prepare apparatus for copying flat work. Later, he saw a fresh negative containing Douglas and Edith together. Edith asked, "Did you see the exposure that created S1? "No, miss." "Did you see Mr. Kirkby retouch it?" "No." "Then we claim neither." Piers seized on it. "So he cannot say I made S1. He cannot say he watched the exposure." Edith replied, "He can say you ordered the source prints, received them, and controlled the paper arrangement he saw. The plate itself tells us where the figures came from." She turned to the retired printer. He confirmed only what he knew. Years earlier, while Piers worked in the Winchester studio that handled Thackwell photographs, Piers had used extra unmounted proofs, black mounting card, arranged paper figures, and copy negatives. "Did you see Mr. Kirkby fabricate the photograph of His Grace's sister?" Edith asked. "No." "Did you see him expose S1? "No." "Thank you." Piers looked around the room. Anyone could have taken 2 paper proofs. Edith faced him. "Who ordered them?" The assistant answered quietly, "Mr. Kirkby." "Who received them?" "Mr. Kirkby." Harland added, "D6 itself was returned to my keeping after the recorded printing session and has remained there. G3 was secured once the missing proof was discovered." Neither glass source plate disappeared. Edith looked directly at Piers. "S1 is a glass negative of a paper composite assembled from source prints you ordered and controlled. It is not a live photograph of His Grace and me standing together." Piers's face lost color. "You are destroying a profession over inference." Douglas spoke for the first time. "No, your profession gave you the means. Your choices gave us the inference." Lady Marjorie rose. "I did not make the photograph." "No," Edith said. "You did not." Douglas looked at Marjorie. "But you knew Mr. Kirkby's work was already being questioned when you allowed the cards to circulate." Her composure cracked. "I wanted her gone. She was in every conversation, every decision. People had begun speaking as though she belonged here." Douglas's expression cooled. "You will send written corrections to every household known to have received or discussed those cards. If you refuse, I will send the corrections myself and explain why. You will not be received at Glenstead again in either case." Marjorie lowered her gaze. "I will write them." Douglas turned to Piers. "Your commission ends today. Mr. Harland will inventory the remaining Glenstead materials. Former clients with reason for concern will be contacted privately through their own advisors." Piers's mouth tightened. "And you call that justice because you are a duke?" "No." Douglas stepped beside the table, still not in front of Edith. "That is why Miss Loxley proved the matter before I spoke." He looked around the gallery. "There is one thing that belongs to me. When Miss Loxley arrived, I warned her that a pretty face would not help her. It did not. The error was mine in believing her face had anything to do with why she stood before me." Edith's breath caught. Douglas continued, "I once mistook what I could see for what I had the right to know. I repeated that failure with her. Everything demonstrated here this morning is Miss Loxley's work, her judgment, and her restraint." No one applauded. Edith was grateful. The silence was better. The people who had stared at C1 now looked at her as though forced at last to distinguish a woman from an image of one. By early afternoon, the gallery had emptied. Piers's remaining Glenstead materials were under Harland's inventory. Marjorie had withdrawn to prepare her departure, and the assistant and retired printer had been given luncheon. Edith stood near the long table when Douglas returned. He stopped several feet away. "Yesterday you told me that after the truth I might say what I mean. I remember. I love you, Edith." The words were quiet, stripped of title and audience. "Not because you proved me wrong, because you showed me what truth looks like when it refuses cruelty." Emotion rose quickly enough that Edith needed one breath before answering. Then she crossed the space and took both his hands. "I love you too, Douglas." His fingers closed around hers. "I do not want today to turn that into an obligation." "It hasn't. Then may I court you? Properly, openly, without pretending gratitude is consent or scandal is an engagement." Edith smiled. "Yes." Douglas lifted their joined hands slightly, then waited. Edith tightened her fingers around his. The false photograph had manufactured a moment between them that had never existed. This one required no camera, no witness, and no proof beyond the fact that both of them had freely chosen to remain. By early spring, nearly 6 months after the morning, in Glenstead's picture gallery, Piers Kirkby's name had ceased to carry the polished certainty it once had among fashionable clients. His commission at Glenstead had ended that day. In the weeks that followed, Mr. Harland contacted only those former patrons, whose own records gave them reason to question Ursula work, and he did so privately through solicitors rather than drawing-room rumor. Several families withdrew their patronage. 2 disputed photographs surfaced. Another former client produced correspondence, suggesting that silence had once been encouraged when questions became inconvenient. None of it became public entertainment. There was no dramatic confession, no newspaper spectacle arranged by Douglas, and no neat punishment delivered in a single afternoon. Piers's fashionable studio simply lost the thing on which fashionable studios depended most: confidence. By the end of winter, it had closed. Claims and disputes continued through counsel, slow and expensive, and far less theatrical than scandal had been. Lady Marjorie Norcross sent the written corrections she had promised. They were not warm, but they were clear. She acknowledged that the photographs circulated at Glenstead had been proved false, and that she had allowed it to travel after its authenticity was already under question. She was not received at Glenstead again. Edith asked for nothing further. She had never wanted humiliation repaid with humiliation. The greater change in her life had taken place more quietly. Douglas courted her openly for roughly 10 weeks after the hearing. He came to Winchester rather than expecting her always to come to Glenstead. He sat in the front room of Loxley photographic rooms while she finished appointments instead of asking her to cancel them. When he proposed marriage in December, he did so after courtship had made the question unsurprising but not inevitable. Edith accepted because she wanted him, not because society had once placed their faces together on paper. Their engagement lasted about 8 weeks. The marriage settlement was completed before the wedding date was fixed. Protecting Edith's professional income and her control of Loxley photographic rooms, 3 Sundays of banns passed in the proper parish manner. They married in February. Now 6 or 7 weeks later, Edith was Duchess of Sparsholt and still signed studio accounts as Edith Loxley where business required it. Douglas had never suggested otherwise. On a mild March morning, Mr. Harland asked them both to join him in the private Thackwell family archive in the older wing of Glenstead. The room held estate records, family correspondence, and portraits no guest ever saw. O1 lay on Harland's desk in the same protected wrapping it had occupied since the autumn. It had never appeared in the public hearing. It had never been used as a spectacle to prove Piers's guilt. Douglas stood beside Edith while Harland uncovered the photograph. His late sister remained frozen there beside a man she had sworn she had never met privately. 8 years earlier, Douglas had looked at that image and asked her to explain what he thought the camera could not invent. Now, he looked at it differently. "I used to think I needed to know exactly who made it," he said. Edith kept her hands away from the print. "Do you still?" "No," he answered without hesitation. "I know enough to know she told me the truth." Mr. Harland placed a dated memorandum beside the photograph. Douglas had dictated it carefully. The wording did not claim that Piers had been proved the maker of O1. The evidence had never gone that far. It stated instead that later examination had shown the photograph could not be treated as reliable evidence of the alleged meeting, and that the late Miss Thackwell's denial was accepted by her family as truthful. Douglas read the final lines once more. "I spent years wanting this record to accuse someone else," he said. His voice was quiet. "It should have begun by ceasing to accuse her." Edith looked at him. Grief remained in his face, but it was no longer trying to turn itself into certainty. "Then sign it." He did. Mr. Harland witnessed the memorandum and placed it with O1 inside the private family archive. There would be no announcement at dinner. No visitors would be invited to admire the correction. Douglas did not ask his dead sister for forgiveness she could no longer give. He simply changed the record, still within his power. When Harland closed the archive box, Edith reached for Douglas's hand. He looked down as her fingers entered his, then closed his hand around hers without surprise. They stood that way for a moment in front of the shelves that had once preserved the family's doubt and would now preserve its correction. By late afternoon, Edith was back in the repaired photographic pavilion beside the orangery. Several cracked panes had been replaced, the work tables strengthened, and the darkroom ventilation improved according to her specifications. Douglas had once suggested replacing nearly everything in polished oak until Edith asked whether he intended to operate a photographic studio or launch a naval vessel. After that, he had learned the virtue of asking before improving. The pavilion remained part of Glenstead, available whenever Edith worked in Hampshire. But it had not replaced her Winchester rooms. A trusted manager handled routine appointments there when she was away. Important commissions remained hers to accept, refuse, or schedule. That afternoon, she had just finished an independent family portrait for one of Douglas's married cousins. The sitters had left. A clean glass plate waited prepared for the following morning. Her father's worn pearwood lens cap lay beside the camera, its edge polished smooth by years of use. Douglas appeared at the pavilion entrance and stopped there. He had learned not to walk into an exposure merely because he owned the estate surrounding it. Edith checked the plate holder one final time, then looked up. High praise. "Do not become vain." He entered. "Are you finished?" Edith returned one instrument to its case. "The exposure is." Douglas looked at her. "That was not what I asked." She turned. "Then ask properly. Are you done working?" Edith glanced toward the clean plate waiting for tomorrow. "For today." "Good." He came to her side and kissed her temple. The gesture was ordinary now. That made it more precious than anything forbidden could have been. "I missed you," he said. Edith raised one eyebrow. "You saw me at luncheon, several hours ago. Your grace has suffered. Douglas suffers more attractively." She laughed softly. "That is exactly the sort of statement that first caused trouble. Then I withdraw it. Too late." Edith placed one hand against the front of his coat. This time there was no uncertainty in the gesture, no scandal to answer, no gratitude to repay. She rose slightly and kissed him. Douglas did not take over the moment. He let her set its pace, one hand settling at her waist only after she had already closed the distance. The kiss was warm, familiar, and unhurried. When they parted, Edith remained close enough to feel his breath against her forehead. "I love you," Douglas said. Edith smiled. "I love you too." His eyes shifted toward the camera. "May I steal you from photography now? You cannot steal what comes willingly." Edith stepped away from him long enough to pick up the pearwood lens cap. The worn wood felt familiar in her hand. She placed it over the camera lens herself. It settled into place with a soft click. Beside it, the clean glass plate remained untouched, ready for tomorrow and carrying nothing yet except possibility. Douglas opened his hand. Edith looked at it, then placed hers in his by choice. They walked out through the open pavilion door together into the lengthening spring light. Behind them, the lens remained capped. The new plate remained blank. Across the wooden floor, two shadows moved side by side toward the orangery. Neither led, neither disappeared behind the other.